Welcome. Learning Science Goes Online is a series of short videos in which we analyze key findings from the education research literature and then connect those to the practice of designing and teaching online courses. In this video, we're going to be looking at differences between online and face-to-face learning in the K-12 setting. I want to emphasize that this is really different from studies that directly compare online and face-to-face delivery of the same course taught by the same instructor. In those studies, on average, there aren't many differences between online and face-to-face learning. But this is a little bit different. Here we're asking, what is the state of online versus face-to-face learning right now in K-12? So the question is, in schools today, which one is more effective, online or face-to-face learning? I don't want to bury the lead here. In K-12, right now, online is not faring as well as face-to-face instruction. So the study that we're going to focus on today is a very recent study in which there was a large-scale comparison of schools across the US, focusing on online schools and blended schools. Blended is a mix of online and face-to-face instruction. And these were compared against the national average for schools, which basically is representative mostly of face-to-face learning. In this study, they looked at the characteristics of the schools and the students. And then they also looked at student achievement, which is what we want to focus on. I think the key limitation of this study is that this is telling us observationally what's happening now. What we do know is that there are big differences between the students, between the schools, and the instructional methods between online and face-to-face schools. And so the differences observed between online learning and face-to-face learning could be in part due to the characteristics of the schools, in addition to differences in the medium itself. Let's take a deeper look at that particular limitation by looking into the number of students per teacher in each of these types of schools. On average, nationally, we have 16 students per teacher. There's twice as many in blended schools and 3 times as many in online schools. So there's many more students per teacher in these environments, which indicates one of the many key differences between online and face-to-face learning as is implemented right now in the US. So what's the story with student achievement? When we look at graduation rates, on average, there's a very high graduation rate across the country, about 84%. That's much lower in both blended settings and in online settings. And that suggests that these settings are not doing as well by students in terms of learning outcomes. So what can we conclude from this study? First of all, it's very clear that there are large differences in terms of achievement between the online and the in-person instruction. But what is the cause of these differences? One obvious difference is the instructional medium itself. In some cases, students are learning remotely. In other cases, they're face-to-face with their teachers. This creates a very different environment with very different constraints. But there are also key differences in terms of the schools themselves. As we can see, online schools have many fewer teachers per student. And also in the student characteristics. It's not like a random sample of students have been assigned to in-person or online schools for this study. There's a lot of self-selection that's happening. And finally, there are a lot of differences between schools within each category. There are high-performing online schools, just like there are high-performing in-person schools. So we need to study those high-performing online schools and understand what they're doing differently or what's happening differently in terms of the students coming into those schools to really understand when and where online learning can work. Secondly, I want to emphasize that teaching online is hard work. And we need to better understand the best practices in teaching online, and then we need to evaluate whether those best practices are actually being used in online schools in order to make a really good comparison between online and face-to-face learning in the K-12 setting. And then finally, I think it's really important to emphasize that this study and others have shown that we need to be particularly concerned about students in certain groups. So, for example, students who come from historically disadvantaged backgrounds or students who are entering at a lower academic level, those students are going to struggle more in an online setting. That's what the research suggests. And additionally, there is some research to indicate that younger students, elementary students in particular, might have more trouble in an online learning environment. And so, if we have to teach online, we really need to pay special attention to those students who are struggling, invest time in those students, and reach out to those students proactively in order to help them succeed. Thanks for watching. You're free to reuse this video for internal training in your school, but please do not reuse it for any commercial purposes.